Emma Carter watched the morning sunlight filter softly through the living room curtains, the quiet hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. The house felt unusually large today, too quiet without Ryan bustling around. He had left early for work, as he often did, his briefcase slung over his shoulder, a quick kiss on her cheek, and then he was gone. The faint echo of his footsteps down the hallway still lingered in her mind, reminding her how alone the space could feel. She set the kettle on the stove, letting the warmth and smell of boiling water fill the kitchen, trying to shake the emptiness that clung to her like a second skin. Her thoughts drifted as she moved about the room, brushing dust from the shelves and straightening a few scattered books. It wasn't that she disliked her life, it just sometimes felt like she was living in the spaces between Ryan's presence, filling her hours with small chores and silent routines. She paused for a moment, hands resting on the counter, staring at the pale walls, imagining what it would feel like if someone else were here with her, someone who noticed her in ways Ryan didn't seem to anymore. The doorbell rang, startling her from her thoughts. She opened it to see Gideon Hale, the landlord from whom they had rented the house. He smiled politely, his eyes catching the morning light as if he knew the effect he had on people. Emma stepped aside to let him in, trying to mask the sudden flutter in her chest. "Morning, Emma," he said smoothly. "I just wanted to check a few things around the house, make sure everything's all right." His voice was calm, steady, yet carried a warmth that made her cheeks heat slightly. "Of course," she replied, forcing her tone to sound neutral. She led him into the living room, gesturing toward the couch. "Please, have a seat. Would you like some coffee?" Gideon shook his head politely, sitting with a casual ease that somehow seemed both respectful and confident. Emma moved to pour her own cup, aware of the subtle way he studied the room, taking in the furniture arrangement, the small decorations she had carefully chosen. There was something in the way he observed, a focused attentiveness, that made her feel noticed in a way she hadn't felt in months. As she returned to the couch, carrying her own cup, she found herself lingering just a moment too long near him, her mind spinning in a way that was both thrilling and unnerving. They began discussing the minor repairs around the house, the leaking faucet in the kitchen, the squeaky hinges on the doors. Gideon's explanations were practical, precise, but he had a way of speaking that made even the simplest topics feel personal. Emma laughed quietly at one of his light jokes, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She caught herself imagining what it would be like if Ryan had the same easy charm, the same ability to make her feel seen and appreciated. The thought made her heart twist slightly with guilt, but she couldn't push away the fascination she felt toward this man who had, in just a few minutes, shifted the air in the room. Gideon leaned forward slightly to show her how a hinge could be tightened, his hands moving deliberately and carefully. Emma felt a strange awareness of the proximity, a tingling sense that she wasn't used to. She forced herself to focus on the task at hand, noticing the way the light fell across the room, casting long shadows that played along the walls, keeping her mind occupied. But even the shadows seemed to highlight the closeness, the space between them that was charged with something unspoken. As he spoke, Emma realized she was hanging on to every word, feeling a pull that both excited and scared her. She caught herself smiling at little things he said, the corners of her lips lifting without conscious thought. The room felt smaller somehow, more intimate, and she had to remind herself repeatedly that Ryan would return home soon, that this was just a polite visit, nothing more. Time seemed to stretch. A small noise outside drew Gideon's attention, and he excused himself briefly to check on something near the window. Emma sat there, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup, feeling the heat seep into her palms. She realized how much she had been craving attention, any form of connection that made her feel important and noticed. The brief conversation, the way Gideon's eyes had met hers, lingered in her mind. When he returned, he continued explaining a few minor adjustments around the house. Emma tried to keep her focus on the practicalities, but her thoughts drifted again, imagining what it might be like if these moments weren't limited to polite conversation about leaky faucets and squeaky doors. She shook her head subtly, chastising herself for entertaining thoughts she knew she shouldn't. Yet, there was a warmth in the room now, a charged undercurrent that hadn't been there before. By the time Gideon prepared to leave, Emma realized she was reluctant to see him go. His smile, polite and warm, held a promise of attention and interest that she hadn't realized she had been missing so acutely. She walked him to the door, feeling a small pang of disappointment as he stepped outside, the crisp air separating them once more. She closed the door behind him, leaning against it for a moment, letting herself breathe deeply, her mind racing with emotions she hadn't fully acknowledged before. The house was quiet again, but it felt different now. The sunlight seemed softer, the shadows longer, and Emma felt a strange mixture of excitement and guilt swirling within her. She wandered back into the living room, setting her empty coffee cup on the table, and sat down, staring at the floor. She knew she had crossed an invisible line, one defined not by actions but by thoughts, by desires that were stirring dangerously close to the surface. Emma's phone buzzed with a message from Ryan, asking how her morning had been. She typed a quick reply, smiling faintly at his words, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying the visit in detail. She wondered, not for the first time, how easily her emotions could shift, how quickly loneliness could make her vulnerable, and how a simple visit could leave a mark on her day that lingered long after the visitor had gone. The rest of the morning passed slowly, Emma moving through her tasks almost mechanically. Yet, beneath the mundane motions, her thoughts remained with the brief connection, the subtle charm of Gideon Hale, and the unsettling awareness of desire she hadn't expected to feel. The day had begun like any other, but it had changed in small, almost imperceptible ways, setting the stage for emotions and conflicts she wasn't yet ready to face. By the time the sun was higher in the sky, Emma realized she was waiting, in a quiet, anxious way, for the next moment when Gideon might reappear, though she knew it was unlikely. Her mind replayed every detail, every laugh, every glance, holding onto them as if they were fragile treasures. And as she moved about the house, the quiet walls seemed to echo her thoughts, reminding her that life, even in its most ordinary moments, could change. The afternoon sunlight slanted through the curtains, casting long streaks of warmth across the living room floor, yet the quiet in the house felt heavier than before. Emma Carter found herself restless, moving from room to room, her thoughts drifting constantly to the brief encounter with Gideon Hale. The memory of his calm, attentive presence lingered like a whisper she couldn't shake, and the more she tried to focus on mundane chores, the more her mind replayed every detail, the way he had smiled, the subtle tilt of his head, the careful way he had leaned closer to explain the hinge adjustment. She poured herself another cup of coffee, holding it in her hands as if it could anchor her racing thoughts. Every creak of the floorboards, every faint sound from outside, made her heart jump, as though she were expecting him to return. The rational part of her mind reminded her that this was only a casual visit, that she was married, and that Ryan would be home in a few hours. Yet, the rest of her mind refused to listen, entangled in the thrill of attention, the way it felt to be noticed in a way she hadn't felt in months. A soft knock at the door broke her reverie. She opened it to find Gideon standing there again, holding a small toolbox. "I realized I forgot to bring the replacement screws for the cabinet hinges," he said, smiling politely. His presence filled the doorway in a way that made the space feel smaller, warmer, charged with an undercurrent Emma couldn't ignore. She stepped aside, inviting him in, her pulse quickening despite herself. "Come in," she said, keeping her tone casual. "I was just tidying up a bit." She moved toward the living room, feeling the subtle awareness of him following her movements. Gideon carried himself with an ease that made the simplest actions, crossing the room, setting down a toolbox, seem deliberate, magnetic even. Emma felt a flutter of nervous energy as she returned to the couch, her hands clasped tightly around her coffee cup. They sat, discussing the hinge replacement in a matter-of-fact way, yet the air between them seemed to hum with a quiet tension. Gideon explained the steps with patience, leaning just slightly closer than necessary. Emma felt the warmth of proximity, the sensation of shared focus, and realized with a start that she was enjoying the attention far more than she should. She told herself she was imagining things, that her feelings were nothing more than loneliness amplified by charm, yet she couldn't shake the thrill that threaded through her chest. Her laugh came easily at one of Gideon's subtle jokes, and for a moment she caught herself lost in the sound, marveling at how natural it felt to be noticed so completely. She glanced down at her hands, remembering how she had been fidgety when he first arrived, and now she felt a strange confidence in her movements, as if his presence had shifted something inside her. Gideon paused, tilting his head slightly, as if noticing her shift in demeanor. "You've got a good eye for detail," he said, his voice low and calm. "It makes this a lot easier to handle." His words weren't flirtatious in the obvious sense, but there was a subtle warmth, a recognition of her worth that sent a jolt through Emma's mind. She felt a flush rise to her cheeks and looked away, pretending to examine the room while her thoughts spun in quiet chaos. She recalled a quiet afternoon with Ryan some weeks ago, the house empty, her attempts to draw him into conversation met with distracted nods or absent-minded responses. The contrast between that indifference and Gideon's attention now felt stark, almost painful. She reminded herself sharply, this was not love, not even attraction in the traditional sense. It was acknowledgement, presence, focus, a kind of emotional intimacy she had been craving, and it scared her. A sudden noise outside caused Gideon to glance toward the window, giving Emma a brief reprieve from her racing thoughts. She sipped her coffee, trying to anchor herself, but her mind replayed the closeness, the subtle shift of energy when they had leaned toward each other, the shared smiles that lingered a second too long. Each gesture, innocent on the surface, carried a weight in her imagination she couldn't ignore. Minutes stretched into an unspoken rhythm of small talk, coffee sips, and the quiet sound of screws being adjusted. Emma caught herself noticing details she hadn't before, the way Gideon's sleeves were neatly rolled, the calm steadiness of his hands, the ease with which he moved through the room. There was a magnetic pull, quiet but undeniable, a presence that made her acutely aware of her own reactions. At one point, Gideon accidentally brushed against her hand as he reached for a tool. Emma's breath caught, and she withdrew slightly, chastising herself inwardly. It was a fleeting contact, nothing intentional, yet it ignited a spark she hadn't anticipated. She told herself it was absurd, that her mind was creating signals where none existed, but the warmth in her chest refused to dissipate. They continued working together, fixing the hinges and tightening screws, each action layered with unspoken awareness. Emma found herself laughing again at a joke he made, feeling a thrill she hadn't experienced in a long time. The room, once just familiar and quiet, now felt alive with potential, a stage where simple gestures carried weight. She felt a heady mix of excitement and guilt twisting in her stomach, an inner tug-of-war she couldn't quite reconcile. When Gideon finally stood to leave, Emma felt a pang of reluctance she hadn't expected. He straightened, smiling politely, placing the toolbox down with deliberate care. "All done for today," he said, his voice calm, steady, but there was a subtle warmth in it that lingered in the room long after he stepped outside. Emma watched him leave, closing the door slowly behind him, and leaned against it, letting out a quiet breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The house felt emptier now, but in a different way. It was quieter, yes, but charged with the echo of tension, the residue of a connection that existed in glances, gestures, and unspoken words. Emma wandered back into the living room, setting her coffee cup down, and sat on the couch, staring at the floor. She realized with startling clarity that her emotions had shifted in subtle but undeniable ways, pulled by attention, charm, and the simple act of being noticed. Her phone buzzed with a message from Ryan, asking when she wanted lunch. The evening settled over the house with a soft, amber glow, the sun slipping behind the horizon and casting long shadows across the walls. Emma Carter moved slowly through the living room, her thoughts still tangled in the events of the afternoon. The presence of Gideon Hale lingered in her mind like a faint echo she couldn't shake. Every gesture, every glance, even the accidental brush of his hand, replayed endlessly in her imagination. She felt a strange mixture of warmth and guilt, a quiet awareness that her emotions had shifted in subtle but undeniable ways. The house was unusually silent, filled only with the hum of the refrigerator and the faint creak of the floorboards beneath her feet. Emma's coffee cup sat forgotten on the table, its warmth long gone, but she held it as though it were an anchor to steady her racing thoughts. She knew Ryan would return soon, but she couldn't summon the energy to focus on that reality. Her mind was still replaying Gideon's visit, the subtle charm he carried, the way he had made her feel noticed, alive, seen. It was exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. Suddenly, the sound of the front door opening made her heart leap. Ryan had returned earlier than expected. Emma quickly set the cup down, straightening her posture, forcing her face into a neutral expression as she walked toward the door. The familiar weight of his briefcase and the soft sound of his shoes against the hardwood reminded her of the steady, dependable presence he brought to her life. Yet, the contrast with Gideon's attention and the emotional charge of the afternoon made her feel both comforted and restless. "Hey, Emma," Ryan said casually, dropping his briefcase by the door. "How was your day?" "Good," she replied softly, her voice steady, though her chest felt tight. She forced a small smile, masking the whirlwind of feelings that still clung to her. She knew she would have to be careful, every word measured, every movement deliberate, as if the house itself could reveal the thoughts she couldn't admit aloud. Ryan hung his coat and moved into the living room, glancing around briefly. "Did you manage everything all right?" he asked, his tone light but caring. Emma nodded, her fingers brushing against the edge of the coffee table, a faint reminder of Gideon's visit. She didn't speak of him, couldn't, not without revealing the shift in her own heart. Instead, she focused on mundane details, the small chores she had completed, the house that looked tidy and orderly. After a few moments, Ryan settled into the armchair across from her, opening a book. Emma moved to the couch, keeping her gaze fixed on a point in the distance, pretending to read, to be absorbed in the room itself rather than the tangle of emotions beneath her skin. Yet, even in that ordinary silence, her mind kept drifting back to Gideon, to the afternoon that had altered the rhythm of her day, to the warmth and attention that had stirred feelings she had not anticipated. The evening passed slowly, marked by small movements, the turning of pages, the clinking of dishes as Emma prepared a simple dinner, the quiet hum of the refrigerator. She carried herself with the practiced calm of someone aware of a secret she could not speak aloud. Every glance at Ryan was accompanied by a fleeting memory of Gideon, the juxtaposition both thrilling and unsettling. She understood that this was not betrayal in action, but the mere shift of desire, the recognition that her heart could be stirred in ways she hadn't expected. As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, Emma found herself standing by the window, gazing outward at the quiet street. The air was cool, the world outside calm, yet her mind remained in turmoil. She thought of Gideon, his calm demeanor, the subtle confidence that had drawn her in. She thought of Ryan, the steady presence she had relied on for years. And she realized, with a sharp pang, that desire and loyalty could coexist uneasily, each demanding attention in ways that left her feeling stretched thin. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Ryan, simple and mundane: "Heading to bed soon. Good night, love." Emma typed a reply, her fingers lingering over the keys. She wanted to reassure herself, to reinforce the bond that had always been there, yet a part of her longed to reach out in ways she hadn't dared, to explore the curiosity and excitement that Gideon had stirred. She sent the message, smiling faintly at Ryan's words, but the feeling in her chest remained, a subtle, lingering tension she couldn't shake. Emma moved to her bedroom, the room quiet except for the faint rustle of sheets as she adjusted them. She lay down, staring at the ceiling, tracing the shadows cast by the dim light of a bedside lamp. The house was dark, Ryan asleep nearby, yet she felt awake in a way that went beyond the physical. Her mind replayed the day, every glance, every subtle gesture, every word spoken and unsaid. She knew that the afternoon had left its mark, not in actions, but in thoughts and emotions that would not fade easily. Sleep came fitfully, each dream threaded with echoes of Gideon's visit and the stark contrast of Ryan's steady presence. When she woke the next morning, the house was filled with the soft light of dawn. Emma rose slowly, moving through her routine with a quiet awareness of the delicate balance she now carried, between loyalty and desire, between what was safe and what stirred her heart. The day began as any other, yet Emma knew it was different. She moved about the house, tidying, preparing breakfast, her mind alert to every sound, every small shift in the environment. She anticipated nothing, yet carried the memory of the previous day with her, like a shadow she could not ignore. She realized that life could change in subtle, almost imperceptible ways, and that a single afternoon, a single encounter, could ripple through her emotions, leaving her questioning, reflecting, and waiting. And so the house remained quiet, the rooms filled with ordinary objects, sunlight filtering through the curtains, the faint hum of life continuing around her. Yet Emma felt a shift, a quiet undercurrent that promised that nothing would be quite the same again. The memory of Gideon Hale lingered in her mind, a reminder that attention, charm, and human connection could awaken feelings even in the most ordinary moments. And as she moved through the house, she knew that the day had ended, but the story, her story, was far from over.